Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Nice to see you back in our, I would say, third third webinar series in this COVID series. As you probably, most of you probably watched our previous webinars that were with Dr. Berger from Australia and Dr. Jimenez from Colorado. The previous webinars were quite, I would say, a little bit theoretical in a sense, right? So we were talking about why COVID is airborne, what is the evidence behind it. Jose also shared a lot of materials there and kind of giving arguments to why this is airborne, why the COVID disease is airborne. And back then, it was still kind of an ongoing debate, I would say. But now I would say the jury is finally in, and now most institutions actually do recognize that COVID is actually airborne. And this is why we have for today, we have, let's say, well, we will see how the conversation takes us, but we have a more practical view of it. We will be joined by Professor Angelo Ciribini, who is a research fellow from University of Brescia, and he has actually worked firsthand in a project that has helped a school in Milan to actually implement a lot of these protocols for airborne COVID and in general COVID protection. So he will talk about that in more detail during the webinar. As always, this webinar is brought to you by ARONET 4. At the end, I will talk a little bit more about what is it. So as you see here on my table right here, this is the nice ARONET 4 device, the air quality sensor. And we have some news actually since the last time we spoke. Actually, the design of ARONET 4 has been, I would say, greatly improved. So it looks like this now. So if you would order the ARONET 4 now, you would actually get this new and improved version of ARONET 4. So I will talk about the differences and all of the benefits at the end. But so as promised for today, I would like to introduce you to Professor Angelo Ciribini. Hello, Professor. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon or good evening. Depends on your own location, of course.
We have a lot of people actually joining from United States as well. So it's morning across the ocean and it's evening here. So thank you for making your evening available for us. And I know that you are probably very busy. But can you maybe start with a little bit of history? So how did you get involved with this research? What were the beginnings of it?
Yeah, of course. First of all, together with some colleagues, some years ago, I was establishing a sort of within my own University of Brescia, a sort of departmental center called ILAX Lab, which is based within the Department of Information Engineering, and we are investigating the topics dealing with, for instance, smart grids, smart buildings, namely cognitive buildings, and maybe on the near future, semi-autonomous buildings, and so on. So, and after that, maybe more recently, we did perform some maybe research activities dealing with the predictive analytics aimed at managing for instance, the indoor air quality and the CO2 related performances and values. And so when the maybe SARS, CoV-2 and COVID-19 issues were surging on the last year in Italy as well as over the world, the maybe challenge of closing and reopening the schools did appear so relevant and so maybe controversial. And so we did start on the last, more or less on the last May, a research campaign, maybe focused upon nursery, kindergarten, and a primary school located in Milan. And it is involving more or less 200 pupils, kids and pupils. And we did start from, of course, the built set because we were performing a digital survey of the outdoor and indoor environments and spaces. And so we did shape and configure a building information model. So, of course, we did start from the physical asset.
Right. Yeah. In the beginning, you mentioned that you started everything this with schools when it was quite controversial. Could you explain to the viewers, maybe who don't know, why was it controversial?
Yeah, because the school closures did happen everywhere over the world, but depending on maybe different criteria and durations, lengths, and so on. And for instance, Italy was closing the schools maybe until the last September. And but I think that the controversial issues lies with the fact that the schools are contributing or not contributing to the widespread of the viral particles and the contagion, of course. And so we are maybe just now reasoning about the following waves, about how the school could contribute to the disease and mainly to the contagion, because the children are quite often asymptomatic and so on.
So do we see that in statistically as well, that in for example in families where there are children that are going to school compared to people who are just living in their homes with no children going to school, do they get sick more often?
Yeah, but it's clear that maybe the largest portion of the single infection did happen within the households. But it's clear that the school could maybe make easier the widespread, and it depends. But of course, I'm not a medical doctor, but anyway, or a clinician or an epidemiologist. But I think that it's clear that within the school, some super spreader could maybe cause a lot of damages and so on. And so, but it's clear that the issue does remain highly controversial, and the affair is intertwined together with different maybe challenges, for instance, about the distance learning and so on, because many families are not so happy to maybe host their own children maybe when they are following a distance learning program and so on.
Okay, so due to this whole fact, you chose this specific school in Milan. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how was the setup of this research? What did you implement? What happened there?
Yeah, of course, as I was saying earlier on, our maybe main research question, and maybe also our own main value proposition was staying with the digital twinning. But it's clear that when we have to come back to the last year, on the last spring, and of course we are not so we weren't so aware about the fact that as Professor Jimenez is saying, droplets drop and aerosols float. And so we were maybe trying and seeking at being focused upon, for instance, the physical distancing, the hand washing, and the reshaping of the classrooms, canteens, sport halls, settings, layouts, and so on. And so, please.
Yeah, you just mentioned something about digital twinning. So could you? I'm not sure that the audience definitely understands what that means. So maybe, and before you do, I want to remind our audience that you can also ask questions in the chat. So we will have like about 20 minutes at the end where I'm going to go over these questions. So if you find something you want to ask whilst we are speaking, go ahead, just write your question in the chat and we will try to address it at the end. So go ahead, digital twinning, what exactly that is?
The notion of digital twinning maybe was maybe growing some 20 years ago at the University of Michigan within the maybe domain of the manufacturing industry, because it's a notion quite close to the product lifecycle management within the manufacturing industry. And quite recently, the maybe topic has been transposed within our own domain, the construction industry. And it does mean that you have, of course, a physical built asset, a digital replica of this asset, and mainly maybe a bidirectional system of receptors and actuator sensors, nurturing a sort of data sets and information flows, aiming at allowing a sort of simulating device, for instance, maybe a computational model able to simulate various and different conditions in order to manage the built asset more effectively.
Oh wow, so that's really interesting. So you have the actual setting. So in that classroom, it would be like you have, you know, the real school, and then you make kind of a digital mock-up of it. So a 3D actual kind of place. And then you kind of model things like airflow, model, you know, people going in and out and how often they come into contact. And then you kind of, and how does that work? So then you run some kind of simulations and you compare that with reality and then you adjust your models, or what is the process there?
It's correct. Also, maybe being focused upon the maybe the static settings, we were maybe trying to simulate the users, teachers, and students' flows and paths within the school. And for instance, we did simulate the flows dealing with the entrance to the school, the egress, and the flows coming from, for instance, from the classrooms to the canteen, to the outdoor spaces, learning spaces, and so on. And so we were simulating not only maybe the flows, but also the behaviors of the users and occupants, because the occupancy is maybe a crucial and a key point and thing. But of course, we weren't maybe able nor available to exploit some technologies dealing with the image recognition and so on, because it's a very maybe sensitive topic. But I think that we could figure out to exploit such technologies on the maybe on the midterm. But it's clear that there is the maybe concerns dealing with the GDPR and the other legal topics. Of course, but so we were maybe simulating by means of different packages the crowd and individual flows, as well as we were before the maybe reopening of the school to be scheduled on the last September. We were also engaged in preparing a sort of video game, maybe aiming at trying to train the prospective users to follow different procedures, protocols, and rules.
A video game. Wow, that's a really interesting approach. So, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Unfortunately, it was a sort of rough video game because of the lack of resources and maybe time spent. But anyway, we will try to enhance such a solution on the near future. And so the users have been trained on a virtual basis to come back to the school, because maybe a largest part of them were used to maybe exploit and operate the school, but on the previous criteria. And so we did try to maybe explain to them and their parents, because for instance, before the COVID-19 maybe period or age, the parents were allowed to enter the hall of the school building. But after that, they, of course, were not more allowed. They were forbidden. And so I think that also the non-users should be aware of the protocols.
So we are talking, this school is for like small children, right? It's kindergarten,
from
preschool,
maybe
and
2 years old to 11 years old. Or
so
12 years.
This also introduces kind of a layer of difficulty, right? So how do you explain these sorts of protocols and to follow all these things for smaller children? So how do you do that?
By means of pictures. And also by means throughout the video game, of course.
So you actually make all of the children play the video game, right?
Yeah, but their parents were also asked to fill some questionnaires and so on, as well as the teachers and the head teacher too. And but of course, we were also concerned with the computation of the air changes per hour. And so we did, by means of the building information model, we were able to maybe got to get the maybe correct right dimensions, surfaces, volumes, and so on. Because, for instance, we were also by means of a semi-automated tool to check the physical distancing and so on a computational basis. And so we were be able to make some computations about the different rooms and to maybe calculate the needed air changes. But we were not so persuaded about such a solution, and so we did start to investigate the different computational model conceived in order to assess the infection risk mainly by the aerosol transmission, not only, of course, the well-known model coming from or devised by Professor Jimenez, but also other models. For instance, this one coming from prepared by the Max Planck Institute in Germany and so on. And so we were maybe trying to understand how the different agents and factors could affect the assessment. And for instance, I was involving perhaps 5 or 6 different maybe universities, and we are currently working together with, for instance, pediatrician and other maybe medical doctors, and so maybe, for instance, pneumologists too, and so because
doctor.
Yeah, because for instance, within the algorithms involved within the computational models, you have also to assess the viral quanta, and they are depending on the tidal volume and respiratory frequency of the users, of the occupants. And so we were trying together with the pneumologists and the pediatricians to maybe deepen such parameters. And so after that, of course, we were maybe reaching the need for adopting some sensor maybe frameworks and solutions, and we did install the NDIR sensors measuring CO2 and relative humidity within 14 classrooms and the canteen. Mm-hmm. And after that, because we are maybe investigating the smart buildings, we were able to establish maybe a connected system, and we are able to manage a sort of dashboard in order to, on real time, monitor, of course, the values within the different environments, indoor environments.
Mm-hmm. And then you're talking about very many of these, different values and different things to measure. What do you found that were like what were the more important ones?
It's clear that by means of these sensors, the teachers are and were able to, for instance, maybe manage the windows openings, mm-hmm. because the school, as the maybe largest part of the Italian school buildings, are lacking the control mechanical ventilation systems, and so I think that the windows opening remains the maybe the unique or the only fourth maybe solution and measure. And so we were and we are able to monitor the maybe behaviors dealing with the windows opening in the various classrooms. But it's clear that we have to make some distinctions because we did meet, we met maybe initially on the last December, after the installment of the sensors. We met some hindrances, not coming from the teachers and the students, but maybe stemming from the parents.
What were those?
Because they were quite and hugely concerned about the maybe fresh air, the cold air during the winter time. And so someone was saying me, you are trying to avoid that my child could be infected, but I fear that he or she could maybe encounter some other diseases and the pneumonia too on a more traditional basis.
And
And
we
so,
actually do hear quite a lot from like this because it's always kind of a little bit juggling these things around, right? So also here in Latvia, what we've seen in schools is that we want to live, of course, in a perfect environment where we have adaptive ventilation, everything is heated and all of that. But when you have a classroom of 30 children, right, everybody's breathing, so the CO2 level, it goes like to 1400 in like 15 minutes. You open the window in the middle of January and it gets really cold, and it's kind of like juggling this. And there are a lot of people that are saying, I don't care about fresh air. I'm cold. I'm afraid that something will happen. So essentially, what do you say to people like that?
I think that it depends on the mindsets and the behaviors, because I think that, for instance, in Italy, the parents are maybe always quite concerned about the maybe open air and the outdoor environments, not only over the winter time, but also in the other seasons. And so I think that we have to maybe educate and train the parents, first of all. But
So what do you
it's
say to them when you want to train them? Oh, the TV will turn off
maybe
in 5 minutes.
to make them more aware of the benefits, not only from the maybe health and safety related point of view, but also looking at the maybe learning, maybe potentials, learning improvements and so on. Because it's clear that the indoor air quality is maybe affecting, if you are looking at the maybe research findings coming from the Harvard School of Health,
Right.
Public Health, they are, and also from the University of Salford in UK some years ago, Professor Barrett was performing a lot of very interesting maybe research activities, and it's clear that the maybe indoor air quality should allow maybe to improve the learning performances
So
and the teaching ones.
when you explain this to parents, do you typically find that they are more accepting of this, or?
Maybe we have to check such an assumption and to validate it, but I'm hoping so. I have maybe I guess some doubts, but to be honest, but I think that they have to make a sort of trade-off.
That's
Because
true. But one thing is true that, I think that COVID has really accelerated this discussion about air quality, because beforehand, I think most people did not even like we were selling Aranet also even before COVID. It's not just a COVID product, right? And we were talking about this specific Harvard research that you mentioned, actually, where they found that actually spending time in environments where I think it was 1400 parts per million, your cognitive abilities decreased by half, right? And people, when they hear that, they don't believe it initially, but
yeah, but when I was not a child, but maybe um, a lecturer at the Politecnico di Torino. I was cooperating together with some colleagues from Virginia Tech about healthy buildings and indoor air quality, but maybe some decades ago. And so it's not an unprecedented topic, but it's clear that the pandemic is accelerating the awareness, of course. And so I think that, but I think that we have also to make some other trade-offs, because it's real that unless the mechanical ventilation is or has been adapted, it's clear that we have to make some trade-off between the natural ventilation and the energy efficiency and consumption of the building. And so we are also trying to maybe realize how the energy efficiency could worsen because of the windows opening, for instance. But we were also able on the last years to devise and to perform, for instance, a prototype of an automated window. And so within the concept of the digital twin, we would able also to maybe you exploit the automated windows in order to, by means of some receptors, to open or close the window. But it's, of course, only maybe a sort of provocative idea.
But that would actually be a cheaper solution, right? Because what is the alternative? Either you train, the teachers to open the windows, which is, of course, something that you are actually doing. Then, you have a mega huge investment, right, into building these mechanical automated ventilation systems. But something that would open a window could be like a midway for especially these schools that are typically very tight on funding, right?
Yeah, of course. But you have also to take into account and consider that, for instance, in Italy, the management of the educational built assets are depending on the local authorities, not on the teachers or the Ministry of Education. And so I think that it could be quite difficult to manage the filters replacement and so on. And so I think that the mechanical ventilation could be quite useful, but not so easy to be managed over midterm.
Okay. So going back to this school in Milan, so COVID hit, so you started to implement also some kind of protection measures. Can you talk a bit more about that? What was the protocol? What did you tell to the teachers, to the children, to the parents? What changed?
Yeah, I think that the head teacher and the teachers were forced to comply with our own national procedures and protocols, and they are very traditional. For instance, in Italy, there has been a huge, maybe, and controversial to debate about the desks, because the ministry was buying a lot of new desks, maybe in order to make easier the physical distancing. But it's clear that, of course, the protocols are. But anyway, the protocols were obviously centered on the maybe traditional assumptions about the distancing, and so they were a little bit neglecting the aerosol transmission, of course. And so I think that the protocols are remaining a little bit traditional, dating back to the last year. But but I think that apart from this, the main maybe challenge and maybe the more defined one depends about how the maybe official and institutional rules and constraints could be complied with, because the rules and the behaviors are sounding quite different. And this is the reason why we did establish a sort of monitoring campaign to be managed by the teachers about the maybe actual behaviors of the students.
So how was that implemented? What was done there?
By means of some questionnaires to be filled on a digital way.
So it's just like questions about their behavior up
Yeah,
until
of
that
course.
point,
Yeah, yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah.
afterwards.
But let me say that the more critical behaviors are maybe to be observed and checked within the high schools, not the primary schools,
Why is that?
because the maybe the students attending the high schools are persuaded that they are not maybe to be affected by the disease, and so they are not fearing, and they are not maybe available to comply with strict rules.
So do you think this is kind of a bit of a failure in the way that these kind of things are communicated? Because I've also heard that, especially amongst teenagers, there's this kind of pervading illusion that, we
Yeah,
don't care about COVID because children don't die as much as older people do. That
yeah, of
is
course.
actually true. But it doesn't really mean that, their behavior shouldn't change, right?
Yeah, but we have to also to we have to remember also that there is the so-called long COVID, and so the maybe young people could be affected by the long COVID too, but or as far as they could transmit, of course, the virus, but to their parents and
Yeah.
relatives and so on. But no, for instance, I was discussing the issue together with some high school professors, and they were also trying to maybe involve from a scientific point of view their own students. They were trying to maybe passionate them and to make them more aware of the maybe issue of the phenomenon, but they didn't succeed quite often.
Why not?
Because they maybe the students they were and they are reporting me were not so interested.
Oh.
They are not fearing the danger, and so they are not so risk adverse, and so I think that it's so difficult to maybe persuade uh, such students and to involve them. But coming back to the primary school,
Right.
it was and it is more easy to manage this challenge. And so, but anyway, it's clear that the phenomenon is so complex. And for instance, the aerosol scientists and the environmental engineers are always highlighting that the ventilation is not so easy to be foreseen and managed, even if you are maybe performing some CFD simulations and so on. And so,
So okay, but so then in this case, in these schools, right? There were of course these simulations and all of that, but also you had protocols for the teachers and the classrooms that were monitoring the situation. So what was what were the suggestions there? What did they do?
yeah, first of all, I have to say that more recently we did perform some air sampling campaign because I think that we have also to trying to maybe trigger a sort of active surveillance. And for instance, in Milan, some colleagues of the mine are coming from the School of Medicine are maybe starting to maybe to devise some saliva tests in order to maybe perform an active surveillance system. And but we are trying to maybe use the air samples and within uh, the school where we are performing our own investigations, we did perform a couple of air sampling campaign campaigns, and the first one just before the new closure to be occurred on the last end of February, and just after the reopening some weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily we didn't find any maybe clues of virus, but and for instance we are on the near future we will repeat such campaigns within other schools, also based in Milan, and within the emergency rooms of the hospitals.
Mm. Okay.
And so, but for instance, when my colleagues were performing the air sampling, they were quite maybe supported by the CO2 monitoring, because they were choosing this maybe the indoor environments depending on the data sets coming from the sensors.
So, and did you also implement some kind of protocols for the teachers for the CO2 monitoring? So I understand you installed the CO2 monitors in the
Yeah,
classrooms.
we did try to, first of all, we did try to explain to them how these sensors are maybe performing, and how to be aware of the alerts and warnings. Because,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we did establish the thresholds according to the international standards.
And what
And
are
so,
they? So for those who do not know, uh, what are the
um,
thresholds for CO2 values?
yeah, to be honest, during the winter period, we were trying to making some compromises, and so we did fix the threshold, the maybe main threshold at 100 ppm. But more recently, we did lower the threshold to the mm, 700 or 800 ppm.
Seven or
It's more correct, but it's clear that we had to to make some compromises, because the concerns of the parents and so on.
Of course, it's always about compromises, right? But if you don't really monitor at all, it just goes up to 2000, and then it's not good. So,
Of
and
course.
what is kind of the instructions for the teachers, right? So, what do they do? Do they have to look at the device, or do they have like audio warnings, or do you also involve
No,
like?
we were recommending to the teachers to look at the devices, but it's interesting to maybe remark that there were the pupils quite often really sensitive, and they were so careful to maybe monitor the values, and they were signaling to the teachers that the thresholds were trespassed, and so on.
Okay. So, and that also kind of helps, right? So, because that also teaches the children themselves, and they can take that knowledge, and because the teacher. So, what kind of is kind of like the teacher already has to do a lot, right? He or she has to lead the lesson, and if she or he has to follow the CO2 readings, it's another thing, and then their teachers like, oh, how many of those things, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Originally, they were a little bit bored, because they were concerned to be minded away from their main tasks and duties. But I think that they were more and more used, and maybe they were learned.
mm-hmm.
And so I think that but anyway, I think that there were the students quite maybe capable of stimulating the teachers to someone, of course,
Okay.
not everyone.
So this is about this specific project, right? So you have all
Yes.
these researchers at your disposal, and you are, monitoring both CO2, modeling schools, and all of that. And this is a very lucky school, so to say, because of all of this, they are safer. But how can this be taken, like if there are people, we had a lot of teachers and headmasters register from other schools, so what would be your kind of suggestions? What were the main things that you learn? What can some people that don't have a university background, what are the main things that they can implement in their schools?
Yeah, I have also to say that the school was suffering a few quarantines, and so we could be really effective in accomplishing and achieving our own purposes. But I think that there are some very interesting contributions. For instance, this one co-authored by Dipti Gordesani. It's a correspondence published by the Lancet some weeks ago. There are of course the maybe papers coming from the Harvard Public Health School, and there are other contributions quite recently published by the Lancet, and so I think that. But I think that the ultimate rationale of the measures to be enforced are maybe based on a multi-layered approach. It's clear that apart from the sensors, I think that maybe the combination of different measures are really effective, including the vaccine, of course.
Mm-hmm. So
Because in Italy, for instance, the largest portion of the teachers has been for the first dose already vaccinated. They did receive the first shot. But
really
for instance, in Israel, they are maybe waiting for vaccinate the students whose age is under 16.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I
Okay.
don't know in Italy what could be the final decision about such a topic. But I think that the multi-layered approach should work really on an effective manner.
So what do you mean by multi-layered approach?
Uh, to be compliant with different measures. For instance, of course, the mask wearing, the physical distancing and washing, of course, the indoor air quality, and maybe also to exploit the outdoor learning spaces.
Oh, okay. So exploiting the outdoor learning spaces, that also really, yeah, that does help. But that also brings even more, of course, this issue of cold environment, right?
Yeah, of course,
You
but
can't.
it depends on the mindsets and the behaviors, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what are the main things that you have learned from your own research?
I think that we have also to look at the post-pandemic age,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that it's clear that, for instance, the maybe unaware viral rationale is forcing the schools and the maybe the head teachers and the teachers to strengthen the idea of the teacher centrism. And so it's clear that the protocols are urging and forcing to maybe uh, strengthen the idea of static ways of teaching and learning, center on the classroom. But it's clear that the most innovative may be mainly dealing with the primary school, and it's clear that the most innovative may be learning methodology, teaching and learning methodologies are centered about the idea of breaking the classroom, and so, for instance, to mix the different ages and classes, and so to avoid the bubbles, for instance. But it's clear
Mm.
that the rationale of the viral transmission is forcing to establish bubbles, restraints, constraints, and to avoid any interactions between different groups of people, students, and so on. So I think that we have to try to reason about the legacy of the pandemic and to try to look at a sort of preparedness indicator to be applied to the buildings after the pandemic. For instance, the European Commission was establishing the so-called SRI, the Smart Readiness Indicator for buildings, and it's an indicator dealing with the maybe digital capabilities in order to make the buildings more efficient from the clean energy point of view. And so I think that we could try to devise a similar indicator dealing with the future pandemic, maybe preparedness, and above all, I think that it could be an overarching item in order to make the school buildings healthier.
So this would be kind of like a score based on, you know, all the
Yeah.
possibilities that the building is doing, and based on that, you can devise some kind of, you know, suggestions. So you can improve here. This is what you can do. This is, you
Yeah.
know.
But absolutely, but I think that the idea of the digital twin to be implemented within the school communities, not only the school buildings, could be perceived also as a sort of behavioral device. Because if you are looking at the idea of, for instance, smart home or the healthful home, maybe promoted by Amazon or Google and so on, it could work as a sort of behavioral device. And it's clear that, for instance, the European Union and the European Commission is quite concerned about the digital sovereignty. And for instance, I am mentioning the recent act about the artificial intelligence and so on. So I think that when we are looking at the connected built set, it's clear that we are looking also at the maybe surveillance dealing with the users and of course the teachers and the students and so on. So I think that we have to be cautious, but also to be valuable to maybe manage some future and ongoing perspectives, but also to maybe inherit the most suitable legacy from the pandemic era.
Okay, no, that's really valuable. So we are kind of nearing the end of our time. So
Yep.
let's go to some questions that people have asked here. So let me just cycle. So there are a lot of people saying hi. Let me see something in Italian. Okay, so maybe the Italian questions can be answered later on. I'm gonna not try to put this into. Okay, so there's Giovanni is asking something in English. So is there a satisfactory alternative to mechanical ventilation or window opening, especially for the winter months?
It's a hard question to be answered because I think that the mechanical ventilation could be really performing, but it does need maybe a logistical system because in Italy, for instance, I was saying earlier on, there is a sort of divide between the local authorities and the maybe head teachers and so on. So it depends on the countries.
It really does depend. Okay, I guess all the rest kind of there's quite a conversation going on in the comments, but it's mostly in Italian, so we'll have to address it afterwards. But we're also kind of nearing the end of this webinar, so I'm just gonna ask the final question, like, what would be this kind of maybe some final suggestion for everybody? What do what do you suggest for people to keep safe until the end of maybe the semester, until we get the vaccine? So what are your main kind of suggestions, and what do you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah. But apart from going outdoor and, of course, opening the windows, I think that the idea of censoring the indoor environments does mean that you have to be more aware of the space usage. And I think that, for instance, there are some iconic pictures, not only refer to the Italian scenario, dating back to the last year. And it's clear that when you are looking at a teacher or a head teacher measuring by means of a traditional meter the distance between the desks, you are, or maybe trying to review and revise the timetable of the lessons, you are maybe starting to realize that the space has to be maybe understood as a very important matter. And so I think that not only within the school buildings, but for instance, also within the offices and elsewhere, I think that you are to maybe to be you have to accept the idea that the space is, for instance, WeWork is saying that they can provide space as a service, and so I think that the space is maybe a very important value. But for instance, I was hearing some real estate developers. Who are saying that they have to emphasize and maybe also to sell the value of the air. The value of the air. And for instance, the idea of sharing the air or rebreathing the air,
Right.
I think that it could sound as a very sensitive and crucial legacy.
Huh.
Because I fear that the pandemic will end on the near future, but I think that we have to gain some maybe to some interesting perspectives, and I think that we have not to lose the inheritance. I think that it's clear that the people who'd maybe remove the such a stressing period, but I think that the legacy has to be valued, not to is not a forgettable maybe period. We have not to lose the inheritance.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting way of looking at it. So the air in the building is something that we all share, and it's our own common resource. So let's think about, taking care of the air that we breathe,
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah, because
Okay.
if you are looking at the aerosol scientists, for them, the sharing of the air is a trivial idea. But for the users, it's not so true. And so I think that we have to gain a more awareness of the value of the air.
That is a very good message to actually end this on. Professor Cherubini, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for educating our audience, and I hope that a lot of people will go away from this smarter, and can use this also to help to spread the word. And yeah, thanks a lot for your time this evening.
Thanks to you too, of course. See you soon.
See you. Good luck with your research. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for listening today. I saw that there were a couple of questions that came afterwards, and we're gonna try to answer them afterwards as well. They will be probably in the comments or in the appendix of this recording. This recording will, as always, be available on our website. Afterwards, there will be an edited version. everybody who was registered will of course receive follow-up emails. So just to kind of remind you, this whole webinar was brought to you by Aranet, which is this lovely air quality sensor that can be used also in this pandemic environment. We have now also a better design. So now the design is improved with larger numbers. It also shows you this kind of traffic light indicator is a lot more clearer, visible here, and in general I think it looks a lot nicer. Also, I want to mention our nice partners here, Alpo, who have given us this nice wall of plants that is decorating and also helping with the air here in our Aranet studios. So you can see them at alpua.com. So that is it for today. Thank you everybody for watching, and I wish you all great health and endurance, and soon hopefully all of you will get vaccinated and this will be over soon. So thank you very much. Goodbye.